Enterprising, determined, persistent. Three qualities that describe the core attributes of Christian Moerlein the man. Not so surprising, they were also hallmarks of his approach to business. Christian Moerlein was born in 1818 in a small village in Bavaria. He attended school until he was 13 and then decided it was time to go to work. In the summers, he was a blacksmith apprentice on his father's farm. During the winters, he worked in his uncle's brewery. When he turned 18, Christian Moerlein earned an apprenticeship to become a master blacksmith in a small village, but the work simply didn't pay enough. So before long, he decided to look for bigger and better opportunities in Bremen, the nearest large city. Never mind that it was 300 miles away, and he had to travel there on foot, with the equivalent of $40 in his pocket. Determined and enterprising, Christian Moerlein did odd jobs along the way to Bremen. He was about 35 miles short of his original goal when he changed plans. It happened in the seaport city of Bremerhaven when he learned of a ship going to America. This was too appealing to pass up, so he booked passage and landed some 6 weeks later in Baltimore. It was July 1841, and at the age of 23, Christian Moerlein had an entirely new world open to him. He first made his way to Pittsburgh and worked there for a short while as a blacksmith, but he saw a great opportunity to the west. Within the year, he moved to the bustling river town of Cincinnati, where he opened his own blacksmith shop. In 1853, Christian Moerlein decided to get out of the blacksmith business and turn to a thriving trade that he learned during his teen years in Bavaria, brewing beer. He teamed up with Adam Dillman, and the two opened a brewery right where the blacksmith shop had been, in a solid German neighborhood in the Over-the-Rhine section of the city. The two sold their first beer about a year later and spoke of plans to greatly expand the business. But progress slowed when Dillman died in 1855. That forced Christian to find a new partner, Conrad Windisch. The two soon had the Christian Moerlein Brewing Company up and running.
When Windisch got involved, they were making several hundred barrels of beer a year. And 10 years later, they were making somewhere between 15 and 25,000 barrels. At that point, they'd grown a lot. But Moerlein wanted to continue to grow, and he was very aggressive about growing the business. So he and Windisch kind of had a parting of the ways, and he paid Windisch $130,000 for his interest in the brewery, which was an astounding amount of money at that period of time. The brewery grew incredibly rapidly. Moerlein was the first brewer in the city to introduce the newest forms of artificial refrigeration. And that enabled him to do several things. It enabled him, for one thing, to cut his ice production cost significantly. It also enabled him to make a much more consistent beer. Moerlein understood marketing and they understood bottling. And so they were very innovative in bottling, and they did a significant percentage of their business in bottled beer. And even before it was easy to bottle and ship bottles on a long range, they would barrel their beer and ship to other cities where they had bottling facilities. And in that way, they could deliver a fresh bottled product to a market in Pittsburgh or New Orleans. Moerlein also bought a brewery in Nashville, and it was the largest brewery in the South. So they also kind of started this process of brewing beer in multiple different locations.
Cincinnati is a city built on beer, and the beer brewers were the ones who really laid the foundation for all this. Now, early on, beer wasn't a huge part of the city. We drank some beer here, but it wasn't until around 1850 with the introduction of lager beer to the U.S. and to Cincinnati that beer exploded here, and we became one of the biggest producers of beer because we were one of the biggest consumers of beer. And Christian Moerlein was not only a great lager beer brewer, but he was also the biggest brewer in the city, in the state, and one of the biggest brewers in the country. And so he made fantastic beer at his brewery here on Elm Street in Over-the-Rhine in the Brewery District. It was well known. The Cincinnati beer was almost a brand name, of a symbol of beer quality, and Christian Moerlein really led the way. Christian Moerlein not only made the most beer in the city, he also had the biggest physical brewery. And this was a massive complex spread over multiple city blocks. There was the huge brew house, there was an ice house, there were stables, there was a stock house, there was malt houses and warehouses, and of course their offices right across the street. It was an amazing complex that was not only physically significant, it was architecturally significant. It was built to really celebrate the beer that was brewed in there. So they took a lot of design cues from breweries over in Germany, very Romanesque style. And this massive brewery stood on Elm Street, at the head of Elm Street, and really just pushed out beer not only throughout Cincinnati and the US, but around the globe.
The Moerlein family was always seen as hardworking, honest, public-spirited, thrifty, and philanthropic. They dominated the brewing landscape, and when Christian Moerlein died in 1897, the brewing company continued to operate and expand under the leadership of the family.
So I think when you look back at him, you know, the legacy of Moerlein is not that he was a man that brewed beer and he got rich doing it. You know, that can be easy. What's really spectacular about him as a figure is that it was not easy for him, that he went through a great deal of personal struggle to get there.
But in 1920, the most accomplished brewing dynasty came to an end with the enactment of Prohibition the previous year. But that's not the end of the story. The name and quality brews live on today with the new Christian Moerlein Brewing Company in Over the Rhine. We produce bottles, cans, and kegs of Christian Moerlein's brands and continue to satisfy our area's thirst for quality beer. And none of this would be possible without Christian Moerlein being enterprising, determined, and persistent. On behalf of Christian Moerlein and the Moerlein family, I accept this award. Thank you, Junior Achievement, for having Christian Moerlein be inducted into the Cincinnati Business Hall of Fame. I'd like to also just tell you a brief story. Recently, I went to Oktoberfest in Germany. It was a bucket list item that I needed to check. Thank you, my wife. Thank you for my wife, Patty, for letting me go. It's a lot of fun. I went over to brew beer in Germany, in the hometown of Christian Moerlein, just outside of Truppach, Bavaria. And what was interesting was I gave a lecture to the German people attending the brewing ceremonies and beer tastings that we had. And it was about Christian Moerlein coming from Truppach in Bavaria, a small town that has like 350 people, to Cincinnati, Ohio, to be one of the largest beer barons and probably the biggest beer baron of Cincinnati. And what was interesting of that was it was an English presentation that I did. I speak very little bit of German, and it was packed. It had the local newspaper outside of Bayreuth, Bavaria, actually wrote a story about it, and it was absolutely packed, standing room only. I gave a presentation about Christian Moerlein, and most of it was about the story you heard this evening. He was born in 1818, immigrated to the United States in 1841, literally was a ditch digger and a tradesmith and a horseshoe blacksmith, and then became a brewer in 1853. And what was interesting of the story as I went on is I told about the success of Christian Moerlein and what he meant to Cincinnati, particularly his persistence and determination. And when he died in 1897, he was actually the fourth largest brewer in the United States, up there with Anheuser-Busch, Pabst, and Miller, out of Cincinnati, Ohio. But today, in Cincinnati, the brand was resurrected as a craft beer in 1981. And what was interesting of that was that we celebrated Christian Moerlein, but I don't think we really understood the history of all the great Cincinnati beer barons that came to our city and what beer meant to this city. And today, we have the Brewery District Community Urban Redevelopment Corporation, affectionately known as the Brewery District, that is bringing a brewing heritage trail to life in Cincinnati, hopefully in 2018. You can check it out at otrbrewerydistrict.com, and you'll see that because of the success and determination of individuals like Christian Moerlein, we're able to celebrate our brewing heritage of today for many people around the country to come to Cincinnati and enjoy it. And that's really what Christian Moerlein has done from his birth in 1818 that we celebrated in 2017 in Cincinnati, hopefully with the Brewing Heritage Trail in 2018. Thank you.